So one of my inspiring people is Daryl, and Daryl Fondrick is very well known in our part of the country as a mentor, as a teacher, as a just an all-around interesting guy. You know, when I first got into the business, he was just getting his vertical action together, the idea of this action that would make the upright play more like a grand. His brother Dell decided to try manufacturing a piano and paid Daryl a licensing fee to use the action. They built some pianos out in the Pacific Northwest under the name Fondrick Pianos, but Daryl was just such a generous person, and just I love that guy. So he passed away a year ago last summer, just before the pandemic, and it was really shocking. I mean, it's the most natural thing in the world, but it always shocks us when we lose someone. And I think about my little Daryl-isms. Daryl had just lots of little quips. And I just remember him, I was visiting his shop, and we were talking about piano service in general. I remember Daryl, he'd get this faraway look in his eye, just be like, "It's a wasteland out there." And what did he mean by that? You know, a wasteland, that seems kind of extreme. But, you know, I think what he meant is just that there's so many pianos out there that are underserviced, maybe because people don't know, maybe the technicians aren't doing the work, but the positive side of that is, one way to look at a wasteland is also a tremendous opportunity, you know, fertile ground for something to happen. And this is going to get me to my biggest criticism of our industry. So this is where I get to rant a little bit. The overemphasis on tuning. And this has been exacerbated by the sophistication of modern electronic tuning devices. Now this may be the controversial part of this program. And I don't mean to pick on that particular software. It really applies to all of them. But they are extremely accurate in measuring pitch, but erroneously assume there is a specific pitch for each note on the piano, which I would argue is just patently false. Tuning is about windows of tolerance, not about absolute pitch or absolute frequency. And in my work as a tuning examiner, I can assure you that 1/10 of a cent is inconsequential. We'll show you the tuning exam tolerances here in a minute. You can see up on the display there, it says plus, 2.54 up there. Oh, thank you, Bruce. Good to see you, by the way. There we go. 2.54 hundredths of a cent. You know, 1/100th of a cent is, I will say it, it's ludicrous. And the problem with these devices is they do focus your attention on stopping the display instead of listening. And here's probably the rub, is that you could potentially spend 90 minutes fine-tuning a piano using an ETD and end up with a piano that virtually sounds like when you started. And as the great William James said, a difference that makes no difference is no difference at all. Now, tuning a piano with a modern ETD, especially when you start thinking about 1/10 of a cent or 100ths of a cent, that would be like building a chicken coop with a micrometer. One of my friends used to say, "Good enough is the enemy of excellence." He used to put that at the end of his emails. And I understand the sentiment there. You know, you don't want to quit before you're really doing the totally best job you can. But on the other hand, I'm a real believer that perfect is the enemy of the good. And piano service is an art, and I would say it is the art of good enough. But we have to figure out what is good enough. So this is taken from the RPT exam pre-screening manual, which you can find at ptg.org. If you go to the members area, under certification, there is a study guide. This is just showing the various octaves. This is octave 1, 2. These are the middle 2 octaves going up in the treble. And these are the actual tolerances in cents. So you can see as you move from the middle to the extremes, the tolerances get wider and wider. Now let's talk about windows of tolerance. So in octaves 3 and 4, you can be 0.9 cents sharp or 0.9 cents flat, and that was within the window of tolerance for the tuning exam. What that means is if you're within this 1.8 cent window, that note is considered perfect by definition. You will not score an error. And when you move up to octave 5, the window widens to a 3.8 cent window. Then you have 5.8 cents in the octave 2 and octave 6, and then you get to the extremes. Everybody worries on the tuning exam, oh, the high treble. High treble is hard to tune, but nobody hardly ever fails the high treble because the tolerance is so wide. 11.8 cents. And so really, given this scenario, any of these tunings that you would be represented by these lines would be perfect tunings, and they're all a little different. So if you start with a tuning that's the yellow line, but your ETD is trying to get you to make it to the orange line, you could be, that's where I'm talking about, you could spend a lot of time moving things around within such small parameters that you're really not making something that is an improvement to the client. This was another Daryl thing he would say is, don't just tune and run. How many times we heard clients say this? My mother took excellent care of this piano. She had it tuned every year for as long as I can remember. So welcome to reality. Hammers are flat and deeply grooved. The regulation is poor. Excessive lost motion. The checking is far. The dampers are uneven. The pedals are clunky. The action is covered with dust and debris. Tuning is not maintenance. And I will tell you, I come across these scenarios, and the tuning may not even be bad. Maybe the tuning sounds okay. And again, but if you're oriented that I'm there to tune the piano, you could spend your 90 minutes, an hour, or 2 hours, or whatever you have put aside, and you could tune that piano and not do any of this other stuff. And the piano might sound a little bit better. A few months, it'll be out of tune again. This was actually a picture from my client's piano. Look at this guy, a music lover. So one part of the whole process is you want to start looking for voicing opportunities in your everyday service. So you just want to be mindful. Because just like playing the piano, daily practice will dramatically accelerate your voicing skills. And of course, attend workshops and seminars. So good for you. That's why you guys are the elite. But you can also hire or shadow a mentor. And PTG is so good for this. I've gotten so many valuable experiences just hanging out and just with other technicians. I've had projects where I was like, I really need more expertise. And in my area, Steve Brady's been a real go-to guy. I basically just hire him, find out what he charges for half a day or a day, hire him to work on your client's piano. One thing is good for your reputation because then they know that you're connected to this broader chain of command, and so you don't feel intimidated or like, oh, I'm lesser than because I have to call someone. And I think people appreciate it. And a guy like Steve is he's not going to come to my area much to work on piano, so I don't have to worry about Steve like taking over my clientele by inviting him down. And this is a big one. Really, this is how I learned so much from, when you're starting out, you just don't have enough work to do. You don't have a tuning clientele yet. It's not like the old days where there are a bajillion dealers and you go do floor tunings or work for a factory, So, very early on, I started getting pianos and just worked on them. And it's really how I developed basic voicing skills and regulating all your skills, really. And we all know there is no shortage of free or cheap pianos. We get called weekly, oh, can you just come take this piano? And most of the time we can't, But so you can actually afford to be a little picky even. And the nice thing about having your own project piano is that you don't have a time crunch. You don't have the stress of working in somebody else's home. And this is really a good one. You can experiment and try new techniques. And ultimately, you'll be able to sell the piano and get compensated for your work, and then repeat. Now let's talk about the cliff versus the zigzag. So this upper line, the red lines in both these cases represent the level of performance the piano is at when it was new. And then we got time along the top. So in this scenario, the person bought the piano and they played it year after year, and the tone deteriorated, everything deteriorated, and finally that piano they bought in 1970, now in 2020 is 50 years old. Now it's really not good. And so they finally are like, okay, I'll spend the $1,500, $2,500 and just bring it back up. And you can see maybe with technical expertise, maybe for a little while it's even better than when it was new. But then the process repeats. Now down here, this technician was practicing full service. So every appointment, tweaking the regulation, keeping the friction down, doing some voicing. And so who got the better experience? This person got to experience a piano being really nice for just a few years. This person, every time they sat down at the piano, it was wonderful. So this is just something I think is useful to keep in mind. Of course, one of the problems with full service as opposed to just tuning is finding the time to do it. One thing I will encourage you to do is float pitch, unless for some reason there's a compelling reason not to. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Advertise the catch-up service. This has been a really good one for us over the years, especially since we all have websites now. You don't have to try to sell extra work, just advertise it. We have 3 tiers if someone goes to our website. We have our basic service, which is I really try to keep the work down to an hour. There's always an hour of work and sometimes quite a bit of chat time, but those are generally like an hour and a half appointment by the time I drive up to leave. Then we have tuning and maintenance, which is more like close to 2 hours by the time I'm leaving. And then we have the catch-up or extended service, which would be like a 3-hour in and out. And it's surprising. If people haven't had their piano worked on a long time, they often say, they email us, say, we want the catch-up service. I don't even have to sell the job. So it will happen. And here's another interesting thing. Encourage your clients to tune the same time of year. Because, as we all know, the piano sounds better in exactly 1 year than it does in 6 months. Right? This is always begs the question when people say, well, how often should I tune the piano? Well, I don't really know. But the one thing I can tell you is and this is where sometimes, and this is partly what got me into full service more, because when I was a beginner, it's taking me 3-4 hours to tune a piano. I was be exhausted by the end. I didn't have time or energy to do anything else. But as you stick at it, and I would say especially as I got into some institutional work, where the tuning or the service is scheduled not because someone's noticing the piano's out of tune, but just because it's a particular interval of time, then what happens is you show up at the scheduled tuning, and occasionally the tuning is pretty good. It's like, I could tune this piano, but personally, I just feel a little bad just tuning it, not feeling like I really gave the person any value. And if the humidity is fluctuating quite a bit from season to season, really consider promoting humidity control, because again, that potentially will shave some time off the tuning. And then of course you want to focus more on unisons and octaves and just avoid screaming 6/10 and 17ths. Basically, they always tell you octaves and unisons are the most important, So again, balancing out the condition of the piano versus the tuning. It doesn't necessarily, a neglected piano, chances are they're not a tuning connoisseur, So let's talk about the one little decision that changed my life forever. This was another thing. This is something someone told Daryl that Daryl told me. Every tuning should include some voicing, even if it's one note. That will change your life, believe me. One note. Just tell yourself you're going to voice one note. There's always at least one note. Again, we're going to talk about shaving time off the tuning. So about floating pitch. Let's go back to this floating pitch idea. Personally, I feel comfortable with the piano being at 439 at the end of the winter, and this time of year in my area, 442 would be fine. But it's not the pitch that I'm really concerned about. It's what does the tuning sound like? What's the spread of the octaves? Where is the fifth octave relative to the fourth octave? How is the low tenor? Is the low tenor gone really sharp or really flat? How's the bass line up with the middle of the piano or the treble? So trying to look at the tuning as a whole as opposed to, every note has to be at a particular pitch. I mean, are you doing your client any favors if you change the pitch from 439.6 to 440? And if you tune exactly at 440 today, you come back in a week or two, it's not going to be at exactly 440. Maybe it would be. I had a friend who was doing a bunch of recording, and so she was having me come every Friday for a few weeks to touch up the tuning right before her recordings. And it would easily change half a hertz in a week. It was really kind of surprising to me. So floating the pitch with mild changes could save you 30 to 60 minutes worth of time to address tone and regulation issues. And just a quick thing, I've become a real believer in what I call the one-string pitch raise, mostly for these ones where it's a fraction of a hertz, just the whole piano is just a little flat, -439. And basically the idea is instead of tuning every string, you pull one string up per note, and you just want to, you're basically pre-tensioning the piano. You're trying to quickly get it to basically the tension it's going to be at when it's in tune. This is where I use TuneLab for this, and because the spectrum display on TuneLab gives you this real clear visual where the note is relative to in tune. And literally, it can take 5 minutes to do this. It's like a 5-minute pitch raise. And then you can just get to regular tuning. I do most of my tuning by ear. So it's like I just want to get through this and just start tuning my temperament. And, if the piano's older or flatter, I'll do a 2-string pitch raise. And in extreme cases, I'll just bring everything up, at least the first time. And then maybe follow that by then I start over, and then maybe the second time through it'll be a 1-string pitch raise where you can kind of refine it a little bit. But this spectrum display, you can see it shows these pitches simultaneously on the screen. And we will have some time for questions. Is it something that? Okay, so she said, what do you mean by 1-string pitch raise? Well, most of the pianos have 3 strings. So instead of pulling up all 3 strings to a particular pitch, you're pulling 1 string up, and you're overshooting much more. And this is what this slide will demonstrate. The black line is about where the 3 strings started. And then when you pull 1 string up, you can see it go out beyond. So in TuneLab, the red line in the middle represents the target pitch. So I'm pulling 1 string up. You can see the green lines are 10 cents on either side. So I'm going probably not quite twice as far, but somewhere between a time and a half and twice as far sharp on that 1 string as the entire note was flat. Maybe I put it this way. Let's say that it's a beating 1 beat flat of your target pitch, raise 1 string up 2 beats sharp. And then when you come back and do the tuning, you'll be bringing 2 strings up a little bit, 1 down a lot. 2 strings up a little bit, 1 down a lot. 2 strings up a little, and so it cancels out a lot of the drift. And again, be flexible. You can save time by adjusting your tolerances. Allow fourths. Instead of fourths, fourths are theoretically supposed to be at about 1 beat a second, but is anybody going to complain if they're really between 0.5 and 2? Is it going to be a problem if the fifths are allowed to be somewhere between pure and 1 beat per second? Is anybody really going to complain if there's a little bit of variation between the thirds and sixths? And we all know that octaves are not even one thing. Octaves can be pure, octaves can be slightly wide. And, as you move into the extremes, there's a little more flexibility. So the whole idea is to save time so that you can address these other issues. You can always come back and refine things later. You'll hopefully get this person as a client, and you'll be able to get it to another level. Maybe the next time the tuning won't be so bad. You'll be able to do a really nice tuning. But then the piano will actually be maybe reasonably voiced too. This is another thing I do regularly. When I tune the bass, I don't use any mutes. I think it saves time. It generally works best if you're following your own work. And basically, I listen to the octave, wah, wah, wah. And then you pull up one, if this is a double, I'm talking about the bichords, you pull up one string, wah, 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 and then bring the other one up to match it. So you're going like this, one up, so wah, 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 matching the octave speed, and then bringing the other string up to do it. It's a really quick way to tune the bass. And then you can actually do a very refined version tuning the bass, because you're basically using what's called the unison shimming technique, or cracking the unison, where you've decided you're tuning everything open, and you're listening to that octave, and it's like, oh, I wish that note was just the smallest amount sharper. So you detune the unison just a little bit, and then you correct it by bringing the other note up to meet it. So anyways, fast way to tune the bass section. But main thing I want you to know is that this is something you can do. Voicing is something you can do. There can be a lot of mystique about it. I really think everybody should be practicing it. It's not something that only really skilled technicians do. But if you don't have a lot of experience, it can be a little intimidating and abstract, But I will assure you that, like anything, if you keep practicing it, your listening skills will get better. And if you can adopt some systems and protocols that will allow you to get kind of consistent results, your confidence will grow. Okay, here's just a good stopping spot. If anybody has comments or questions, anything from the live stream? We have one up here.
In your one-string pitch raise, you're pulling up one string of 60 unisons, say. As
Maybe.
Maybe.
Maybe it'll just be half of them.
Right.
It really depends on, the thing is you're doing it one note at a time. So sometimes there'll be a section of the piano that is closer than everything else. And often there'll be one section that's a lot worse. But it sort of compensates for that as you go along.
So my question is, after you do the one string, don't you have to do another quick pitch raise for the ones you didn't pull up?
No. The idea is that as you practice this technique, you'll get better at predicting how sharp to tune that note. And you're basing it off the visual display. And I will give it to you that, pianos respond a little unpredictably, But again, in these situations, if I'm, there are situations where if I do the one-string pitch raise and then just, okay, I did the one string per note, now I'm just going to tune the piano and I just fine-tune it. Sometimes you come and check a section and it has drifted a little bit. Maybe I didn't quite pull it up enough. But, it's just on a case-by-case basis. But I would guess 70 to 80% of the time, when I get through that, after I do the one-string pitch raise, I can just do one pass fine-tuning, and I'm done, except for maybe a few touch-ups. Now, I do tune unisons as I go. That's the way I do it. I've done it. I used to use a strip for many years, The technique for getting away from using the strips is very straightforward. If you want to get away from using temperament strips and use open unison tuning, which I think is a good way to go eventually, just leave your temperament strips in a practice room somewhere, and then you'll learn very quickly how to do it. That's how I started. And I remember seeing an old Jim Coleman video it was a Randy Potter video someone had given me from the Randy Potter school. And I was just watching this old VHS tape. And Jim Coleman's like, he was demonstrating with the temperament strip. And he said, and eventually with more experience, you may find that you just tune the unisons as you go. And I just remember going, really? Because I loved my temperament strip. And then with the pitch raise and the temperament strip, I'd always find when I tuned the unisons, things just went off more than I expected. But with the one string pitch raise, or in extreme cases 2 or 3, that just seeing where the note is, estimating how much tension to add on one of the strings so that I'm not just bringing everything up. You're trying to bring down, when you do the tuning, hopefully if you predict it right, it'll be a net 0 as far as tension. Add 5 pounds of tension, add 5 pounds of tension, take off 10 pounds of tension. Nothing has changed. Same thing as you go through. If a little bit of luck helps. And we have another question over here.
For the one string pitch raise, are there any outer limits you would, what's the maximum you would try to attempt with one string?
That's a good question. Yeah, you really have to go with your experience and your fear of string breakage. And I'm probably like a lot of you. Sometimes it'll go 6 months and then I don't have a string break. And I start getting more confident. I'm just pulling those things up, bang! And then I'll be like all cautious for a couple of months, 3 months, and then you start relaxing again. But age of the piano, of course, is going to be a big factor. Like if it's a fairly new piano that's just been allowed to go way flat, I would go half a step sharp on one of those strings and feel pretty confident about it. That's probably too much, but I live dangerously sometimes.
Got one more.
Oh, one more.
I think you kind of answered my question, but I just want to make sure I understand. With the one string pitch raise, you're increasing the load on the bridge.
True.
Across the instrument, and that helps the strings that even helps the other 2 strings.
I believe so. Actually, that's a really good observation, because that's been my experience tuning, is it's different than loading up, with some of the pitch raise programs, they're estimating how much you should load each string, and you're going through and you're loading, as opposed to preloading and then tuning. I think my sense is, and this is not scientific, this is based on my intuitive sense of doing this, is that seems to be an advantage, is the pre-tensioning, because it's like the load is not really changing as you tune, so to speak. All right, let's move on. So let's just quickly talk about some advantages and disadvantages of this approach. Because I have talked to friends who have had some concerns. And one of them is you may undermine your ability to sell a more complete job. Maybe the piano really needs a whole voicing and hammer reshaping, and me going in and doing these kind of quickies is sort of undermining ability to sell a complete job. Doing this type of work, it takes more time. You may need to charge more money. You might be afraid that would turn clients off. And then there is the running out of time, biting off more than you can chew, which I tend to do frequently. I'm always rushing to my next appointment. I have a hard time disengaging. And then with voicing in particular, the fear of the person not liking it. Maybe they're used to how their piano sounds, and you're coming through it, and I'm like, I'm going to make this piano sound beautiful. And then they sit down, and they're like, what am I supposed to like about this? I don't know. So that feels risky when you change the tone of a piano. Now, as far as advantages go, of course, you can really significantly improve the tone of your everyday clients' pianos. And this is a big one for me. I just find it makes the work more rewarding, less boring. You know, if you and you just feel more like a craftsman. And of course, as you practice it day after day, even if it's the one note, if that one note is an experiment and you're getting feedback, and pretty soon. And here's the other thing: if you do one note, your chances of doing two notes goes way up. You know, the ability to keep your compliance pianos working at a higher performance level, your reputation will go up because there are clients who notice this stuff, and usually they're potentially important clients. And then really, ultimately, I think it will be lucrative to pursue this because you will be worth more. As someone who becomes confident with voicing, you're worth more money than just a tuner. Because you're giving quite a bit more value to your clients. So here's a rule: just if you want to do some voicing, make sure your voicing tool is out on the piano right even before you start tuning. Make sure it's right there. Piece of chalk and voicing tools. These are some of my favorite single needle tools, which I use most of the time. I mean, most of the pianos I'm tuning are upright pianos. And so I find the single needle tools are really great. These two in particular from Pianoforte Supply, the ring voicer and the retractable chopstick voicer. Yeah, if you don't have these, I highly recommend them. They're really good. They have incredibly large voicing needles in them. They're very aggressive. Jürgen, who owns the company, he usually supplies you, it's either a number 1 or number 2 voicing needle. Those are big. The thing is, with one needle, you can get a large needle in. If you put needles like that in a 3 or one that holds 3 needles, it takes too much physical effort to get the needles into the felt. Of course, don't forget the chalk. Jürgen actually sells this really nice chalk. It's very soft, and so it wipes off very easily. There's the part number for that. Here's just a collection of the tools I probably use the most often. They have 3 needles. We have this is sold as a Japanese voicing tool through Shank sells that tool. This one's a really nice tool that Coleman Tools, I don't know if he's still selling it or not. Hopefully he is, but this was like a sugar coating tool. You know, it's a lot of very shallow needles. These are probably a millimeter or something. This is one Daryl gave me, you know, and I don't really know where that came from, but the idea is that I have 3 needles that are quite deep, 4 needles that are a little shallower, and then I have multiple needles that are very shallow. And then, of course, my voicing block that I've re-glued a couple times, my short one for doing just a few notes. This is one of my favorite tools for grands. It's kind of not a bad price, really. They have these fancy ones you can get. I've just gotten so used to this one. I actually many times thought about getting the one where you can adjust the depth of the needles. That one seems really cool. That's built on the same principle because there's some significant things about this tool that make it better than some of the cheap tools. I just think it's hilarious, the needles in this picture. If you put your needles like that, you're going to not have very much success. They will break so easy, you won't be able to get them in. Here's a close-up. One of the significant things about the success of this tool, because I had some cheaper tools at the beginning, and I was always breaking needles. And it's so frustrating. And it slows you down. You got to put the needle in. It's frustrating. 2 things really changed that. One was getting good quality voicing needles instead of just cheap ones from the fabric store. But part of the reason why this tool works so good, and these are probably number 7 needles, is this hole is significantly bigger than the needle. So there's a little bit of free play in there. And that free play allows the needle to move a little bit as it enters the felt instead of just bending. Otherwise, they just would bend right at this point right here. But that little bit of free play, I remember Daryl pointing this out to me. Daryl in his shop had something he called the wall of shame, and he had all these crappy tools hung on there that he bought from piano supply companies over the years, and that just didn't work, you know. And he had a couple of these voicing tools, and where they just clamp the needles right up here, so that the needle is held firm, and they always bend and break, you know. So if you get whatever voicing tool you get, make sure. So the needles are actually held in place down here, and then they go through a guide rail, basically. And then Piano Tech and Pianoforte Supply have good needles. Jürgen sells the German ones. They just don't seem to break. They're just better steel. Okay, this is an interesting one that many of you probably have not seen, is what I call the mighty Shank hook. Because, of course, one of the things you need to do is, if you're getting into voicing, is to, anytime you want to, there's a note that sounds off, it's good to get in the habit of checking the fit to the string. And this is sold as a spring hook for upright pianos. It's got a very long shank on it with a little jagged end. But it's just so perfect for pulling a hammer up to the string in a grand without having to pull the action out. This is shaft 8-inch spring hook, item number 91B for the low, low price of $10.25. It fits nicely in the hand, and it's sturdy enough to allow needling while the hammer is pressed up against the strings, which is pretty handy, as you will see in the following video. Let's play it. On this middle C, when I use the unicorda pedal, oops, I didn't mean to, I meant to pause it, not stop it. Okay, let's try it again. We'll go back. On this middle C, when I use the unicorda pedal, not a lot of difference. So if you have just one or two notes that you need to get a little more difference with the unicorda, use this hammer shank hook, which is really the shaft spring tool. And the nice thing I like about this pianoforte voicing needle is the fact that it's it's very precise because it's slender at the end, and I got a nice long needle. So the hammer is going to shift. Oops. So it's obviously going to shift right over to here. So while we're got the hammer up here, we can just needle right into the areas in between the string imprint. And let's see if we can get a little better contrast there. But I like this tool better than the brass chopstick tool because you can just get in places that's hard and you can see what you're doing. All right, let's see if we got a little better contrast there. So yeah, got a nice mellow sound now. There was a comment, Brendan. Oh, the Coleman tool is not available. But there, I'm sure the companies that sell voicing tools, you want to look. It's good to have what you might call a sugar coating tool, which is just something that holds a lot of needles and they're very shallow. And they're particularly good for like taking the edge off the sound, and they're especially like in the very high treble where you want to be careful. You don't want to over needle those hammers. But yeah, that technique right there is super helpful. And of course, not just for this was demonstrating unicorda voicing, but sometimes it's like a hammer fitting issue where you pull the hammer up and you pluck the strings and you're like, okay, this one's bleeding through. You can use that needle just to come in on the shoulder up towards the strike point from underneath, and you can actually push that felt up a little bit. There's just a lot you can do with the hammer at the string because the tool is strong enough that you can actually support it while you're needling. It's a little tricky, but that's a technique I think you would find some benefit in trying. And then this is the other tool I use every day pretty much. It's what I call the turbo voicer. There's really nothing that special about it. It's just a small paddle. And it was based on an idea that I think Fred Sturm put in the journal, where you have your little paddle and you stick a piece of piano wire in the end for plucking. So you have a paddle for filing, and then you can pluck the string. But instead of the wire, well, here, you'll see how it's made. 50 grit belt sander on one side and 400 grit wet dry on the other side. And then a thin strip of 220 along the edge. And then the number 2, a pretty big, hefty needle. And the needle can be used for lifting the felt. I don't know where my picture was. Oh, there it is. So it's a pretty hefty needle coming out the end. The material I make these out of is Lexan, which is I just got at Home Depot. It's just like plexiglass. It seems to be kind of easy to work with, and it's flat. I just glue the sandpaper on there. Here's the back side. That's the really aggressive side. I'll have a little demonstration.
Okay, this is a demonstration of my so-called turbo voicer. We've got 50 grit belt sander on one side, 600 wet dry sandpaper on the other side for fine filing. I've got a narrow strip of 220 along the edge, and we got a number 2 voicing needle from Pianoforte Supply for plucking strings and for needling if we need to. So this is pretty aggressive stuff. So I'm just going to demonstrate how I can just quickly remove some material. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some filing here, because actually what I've really been liking is doing the filing and then chasing it with the hammer iron instead of using the fine stuff. The fine stuff I'll use if I have a note that seems a little dull and I really want to bring up the tone. This seems to be working pretty good to kind of come up this side and then come back around the other side. I'm finding I get really nice results from going from really coarse directly to the iron to lay those fibers back down. It just, it's a rounder tone. But if you want to get some real brightness in there, you probably want to go to a finer grit. We'll just go right to the edge of the screen here. So again, this is a little bit of in the quick and dirty category, but it really makes a difference.
This can make such a huge difference.
Piano just is a little muted sounding. It's that combination of muted and a little tinny at the same time. It's just not a good sound. It's not speaking clearly. Okay, now that's pretty good. You know, I'm a real believer it doesn't hurt to just feel things.
Yeah, use your sense of touch. You know,
just do a little here, touch up on this section. You know, you want to kind of look and see that your strike point is basically level. I'm just going to brush the fuzz off a little bit. Actually, this hammer needs to come over a little bit.
You see it's got a little twist in it? I'm just going to burn that one in a little bit.
See if my lighter is going to work here. I was having a little trouble with it earlier. There we go. Straighten this one out. That's better. Maybe just a hair more. Ah, I love the smell of burning hammer filings. Smells like victory. So, now, look at the iron. And you'll see the effect of the iron is going to be, it's going to make them look almost like I went over it with some very fine paper. And boy, it'll sure last longer. Those string imprints are not going to develop nearly as quickly. And it's quick. Look at that. Look at that. I'm just going to...
Whoops. That's actually good enough for that video. So basically I'm doing a quick filing with 50 grit paper, very aggressive paper, and then going immediately to the hammer iron and just quickly ironing the shape. And I really like the result from that. Not only is it quick, but it's just tonally, I think there's something nice about not putting all those fine, dusty particles into the hammer. That's one thought. We have a question over here, Brendan. Yes. He just wanted me to back up to the slide with the specs to the tool. Let's, oops, boop, ba-doop, ba-doop, ba-doop. Yeah, I thought I had what the width of that is. I think it's about 13 millimeters. It's about a ½ inch wide, basically, 13 millimeters, something like that. Just a little wider than your typical hammer. And, you know, you can customize it to fit comfortably in your hand. And I stick it in a vise on the drill press, and I have these little tiny drill bits, and I just super glue it in there. Sometimes they come out, and I have to re-glue them back in. It's a very low-tech tool. I'm not a Bill Spurlock or one of these guys who can build these beautiful tools. I'm pretty limited skill on that kind of thing. But even I can make one of these, so you probably can too. And it could be made out of wood. Might be an advantage to that. Okay, let's move forward. There's another picture. And that little strip along the side you can use to file one string worth. You know, sometimes you got one string imprint that seems a little lower or a little higher than the other ones. It's touching the string sooner. It just allows you to precisely file one area of the hammer. Okay. Oh, another quick question here in the front. Let Brendan get you.
I noticed that maybe you filed the hammer downward first and then upwards.
Yeah, in that particular example, I did. I don't always do it that way. As you work with hammers, I mean, one thing you become very aware of is that hammers are all different. Sometimes, and I'm not super consistent. Sometimes I use the paddle like I did there. Sometimes I use strips of that same 50 grit, just a strip that you can just tear off, and I'll just come from the bottom just all the way around. But you run into some hammers that peel, and so it seems like you want to go the other direction. So sometimes it seems like it has a grain and it wants to peel in one way and not so much the other. So you got to kind of get to know the hammers a little bit. Did that answer your question? Yeah, you know, sometimes it's some back and forth. You know, again, a lot of times if this work is just being done on a 1970 Wurlitzer console, you know, this is not high-level craftsmanship. This is like, get it done. You have a question in the back? Well, just let him get. This is mostly for the live stream people so they can hear.
I have the same hammer, the iron. Do you heat it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you definitely heat it.
With what?
And you want to use the, for a long time I used it without any sort of heat control. Basically I'd plug it into the wall because I'm so cheap. You know, I didn't want to buy the rheostat for 90 bucks or whatever. And I would just heat up till it went, psst, you know, until I could get a sizzle. But sometimes I was inconsistent. I have scorched hammer felt, yes, I will admit it. But so I finally broke down. And actually, I think Piano Tech sells just an inline dimmer switch. I made one, my first one I just made out of a cheap dimmer switch from the hardware store, but it looked really horrible and clunky. But then, yeah, I got the little nicer one. All right. The portable? Portable, oh, I see what he's saying. He's asking about a portable iron. You mean like you'd use a torch to heat up an iron that's not cordless? Oh, I know what you're saying. There's like these, there is a heat guns and things that are like a soldering iron, basically, that's cordless. I haven't. Might be worth trying, though. Now, always one of the things is what happens if you overdo it? You know, it can happen. You know, sometimes you just go too far. So it's almost important. You know, when I took wood shop in college, and the wood shop teacher was great. He said, really, the sign of a craftsman is how he fixes his mistakes. It's not how good you do it the first time, you know. So one is you can burnish the hammers against the strings, or you can pound it in, and I'll demonstrate that in a second. Another is to take a strip of 1,000 grit paper, push it between the hammers and the strings, and then pull the strip. And that actually works pretty good. And then, of course, you can file the hammers and iron it. Sometimes you just have to get in and remove a little felt. I once had a client who had a very fine piano. The previous technician, I'm not being critical of him because it's the kind of thing I would try too. He had steamed the hammers and just overdid it. And I came in as another person later, and it's like I just couldn't get enough tone. And it was like I was fairly young in those days, and it was a Bösendorfer, and I had not seen, maybe that was the first one I'd ever actually been called to work on. That was one where I called Steve Brady down. I said, Steve, I got this Bösendorfer. Can you come help me do some voicing on it? And Steve basically said, yeah, you're going to have to file a lot of felt off these hammers. And it was surprising, after filing it, the tone just came out. It just sounded so loud and bright, and then I had to follow it with a bunch of needling. So you can always do it. And then, you know, I kind of look at chemicals as being a little bit of a last resort, but not necessarily. And this B72, I'm really becoming a fan of. This is the plastic pellets that dissolve in alcohol. And I highly recommend Ken Eshte. He has a whole class on the PTG website, on the PTG Academy. I highly recommend, if you want to get into knowing, having a very friendly way of bringing up the tone, making a hammer firmer. It's great because unlike lacquer, the alcohol doesn't smell nearly so much, and it dries fairly quickly. And Ken did some studies that the alcohol in that material, it actually, because it's a little slower acting in a way, it moves more of the solids into the interior of the hammer. It doesn't stay so much on the outside. It's a really interesting material. And one of the stories I was going to tell was just about overdoing it. And we were talking about this a little before class. I've had some great experiences where I thought, oh man, I overdid this. There was one, I came to the piano. It was a Young Chang console, kind of small studio, and the tuning was fine. I just didn't feel good about just tuning the piano and leaving. So I thought, I'm going to do a really good voicing on this piano. Just lots of shoulder needling. I really took my time and did this radial needling up the shoulders. And wow, this sounds really great. And then this little girl came down and sat down at actually, at that time I left thinking I did a good job. I get a call back, and I go back to the piano, and he has this little daughter. She's probably like 7 or 8 years old. This little girl sits down, and she just looks so sad playing the piano. Because like I'd taken all the sparkles out of her piano. You know, I'm a heavy-handed player. You know, easy for me. And she was a little delicate, you know, I think. And at that level of playing, it just sounded dull to her. So I really worked. I did the pounding it in. I did some filing. I feel like I got the tone up better. I don't know. I thought they'll never have me back again. And then they didn't for many years. You know, it's funny, these clients that call you every 10 years, whether the piano needs it or not, you know. But it finally, and now the little girl's a teenager. And I tuned the piano, and the voicing sounded great. It's like, you know, it's just that interesting thing where sometimes overdoing it and letting it get played back in can really be helpful. All right, just a couple of quick demonstrations of, this is a technique I really like.
Now, let's say you did some serious needling on this hammer. And let's say we kind of overdid it a little bit. Oh, that's a little too mellow. One thing for setting the hammer felt, kind of refirming it, one technique that I've gotten to really like is pushing the hammer against the string hard.
You can see how much I'm deflecting the
rubbing
string.
it up and down.
Probably even introducing some heat.
That will usually bring it back up quite a bit. It's a great way to stabilize your voicing. It's a little bit like a test blow to the hammer felt.
Hear how much that came back?
The other way I settle things in, sometimes if you're trying to brighten up a note, is to pound it in. Immobilize the string. Oops, I also knocked it out of tune.
And then here's the technique of dragging the fine paper.
And then another technique that I've had some success with, if you're trying to bring up the tone if it's too mellow, is to take some really fine sandpaper. This is 1000 grit. What I'm going to do is put it between the hammer and the string.
Keep your foot on the damper pedal.
Like this. I'm going to just drag it through.
It actually flattened it out a little bit.
Then you may want to round out the shape again a little bit. And then you can follow that with a little more burnishing in, a little more pounding, a little more burnishing in. Sometimes it's some back and forth.
Sometimes you just throw everything you can at it.
And you can really kind of take it back the other direction if you go a little too far.
That really gives you some confidence if you know that you can bring it back some. So when you're getting into this work, it helps to first do it on what I would call less risky situations. And those would be, of course, like churches, schools, and nursing homes. You know, practice room pianos. Yeah, I mean, so it's nice to have some of those situations because basically it's almost like anything you do will seem better. And low-risk situations. You don't want to try this on when you first get your first really nice, newer, fine piano to work on for an important client. You know, you got to, you know, get your chops together on the. This is why the thing. That's why you have to do this stuff, even though voicing is sometimes held up as this high-level thing. It needs to be done out in the trenches all the time because you have to be practicing the skills. And that's why what I believe in too is that, especially when you're a beginner, if you can start doing this stuff early on in your career and be practicing it, at certain points in your career, an opportunity arises. And I remember one of my most important clients, she's got her doctorate in piano pedagogy. I knew she was serious when in her dining room she had a Steinway D and a Steinway B right next to each other. And they both had had extensive work done on them in the past. And it was a very uncomfortable situation because I was filling in for a buddy of mine, actually. And he had a health problem, and I was basically filling in for him. And I worked on her piano, and then she wanted me to come back and work on her piano. And I was like, I'm sorry, you know, and I really wasn't sure what to do. I made up a policy on the fly. So my policy is if I'm filling in for somebody, I have a 3-year wait. I can't take you on as a client for a certain period of time. And she was just a little bit There's nothing to help your reputation like playing a little hard to get. And then, okay, ethics are important. I call my buddy. Do you want to keep her as a client? This is the situation. You be transparent. Just say, yeah, I want to keep her as a client. Okay. He went back and tuned it, and she still wasn't happy. Felt like the unisons had slipped and whatever. And so what she ended up doing, she came up with this workaround. She hired her friend to hire me to tune her piano. And it also turns out that a lot of her students and friends also had Steinway pianos. So, those are like these little nexus points where that client suddenly opens it up. But if I hadn't been practicing my skills on these other everyday pianos, I wouldn't have been able to perform. So you got to prepare yourself. I thought this comes up from time to time with voicing, is the clients with hearing aids. I have a lot of older clients, and this is something I hear a lot. The hearing aids just make my piano sound tinny. Because hearing aids emphasize the sounds, the consonant tones that we use to recognize words. And that being amplified in the piano is not great. It makes the piano sound kind of crummy. Tinny being a displeasingly thin metallic sound. It's a pretty good word, actually. So sometimes in those situations, you have to really have a back and forth with the client. I had a client, she was a really important piano teacher. One of her students went off to win the National MTNA Award one year and has gone on to have a fabulous career. But she had this Baldwin R, and she used to say the top octave just sounds like it's screaming at me. Sounded fine to me. I just get out my needles, and I think, oh my gosh, it just sounds dull now. Oh, that's so much better. Customer's always right in those situations. If you kind of know, you have that experience, you can know, okay, people with hearing aids, they may need it to be toned down more than you think it needs to be for it to be enjoyable to them. And then sometimes I talk to people, I said, some of my clients, they can't have their hearing aids on when they play. So you might just try turning them off when you play. Or, I've also had clients who've worked with audiologists who can fine-tune the software in some hearing devices to make it better for a piano tone. Okay, this is probably one of the most important things in this class right here. Prepping the client. Always, always, always tell them that any voicing work needs a play-in period. Okay, so I tell them, it's like, okay, I did some voicing. I'm really liking the tone of this piano, but anytime I change the tone of someone's piano, I tell a person, it can be disconcerting at first because you've been used to it this other way. And also, anytime you voice the piano, it's going to come back. I have to do it, be a little aggressive because it will come back. It's almost like if you poke a hole in your yard, it'll kind of just want to fill in a little bit. I almost imagine that felt is, you have this immediate effect. I almost think if you didn't touch it, if you came back a week later, it will have come back up a little bit. Maybe that's in my mind, but certainly after it gets played in. But it's a little bit of a psychological trick because you're telling them that it's going to be different, so they're prepared. They're not just, whoa. And then you're telling them, this is what I tell them, once you get used to this, you're really going to like it. So you plant that message in their head. I mean, hopefully that will be the case. And if it's not, you'll come back, you'll fix it. But, it really doesn't happen hardly ever. Most people are very happy with it. And sometimes I get follow-up emails or calls. Oh, I'm so happy with I just can't believe what you did to my piano. I mean, some people are really happy about it. They just didn't even know it was possible that you could change the sound of the piano. So always tell them that there's going to be, give yourself a chance, a week to get used to it. I have a piano playing group. We've been meeting for 20 years. And we just take turns playing each other's pianos and visiting and so on. But everybody always complains about everybody else's piano. Everybody prefers to play their own piano. And, because it's like a dance partner. It's like you're used to it. You know how to get the sound out of it you like. So it's always, when you voice a piano, it's sort of like giving them a new piano in a way. And then speaking a language, you know, when I'm talking to, because most clients, they don't even know, when you say voicing, they don't know what the heck you're talking about. So there's just some easy ways to describe it. So basically I talk about nasally tone, and you can just demonstrate it with your voice. I actually have kind of a nasally voice because of chronic sinus issues. And so I say, you know, it's sort of like, this is not meant to be political at all, but it's sort of like it's like the Fox News voice compared to the NPR voice. This does not have to do with politics. It's just one is like Mark Levine going, oh, yeah. And then the NPR person is like this, you know? So, you know, it's like some pianos are really aggressive. They're kind of aggressive and they're kind of like this. And then after you do some voicing, it makes it like this. Or you could make it more like this. So they understand if you say, you know, you can have two pitches. La, ah, you know, one's going to be a little easier, one's going to be a little easier to listen to. And they're like, oh, I get it. It's not tuning. It's tone. And, you know, these are the things that contribute to nasally tone. Unisons. Poor hammer string fitting. Sometimes it almost sounds like the unison is off, but it's not moving. It's just like it's going to move, but it doesn't. And, you know, flat grooved hammers contribute to nasally tone. Hard hammers, I think, can make the tone a little nasally. Yeah, just demonstrate it with your voice. They'll get it. And just real quick, prerequisites for quality tone, of course. This is all just very basic stuff. You know, hammers properly aligned. String imprints are your friend. You know, these days I do a lot of this before I even start tuning. I just look at the hammer grooves, have your chalk. Oh, this one needs to move to the right. This one needs to the right. Oh, this one's left. This one's a little twisted. Just mark with chalk, and then spend that little time aligning, which then brings you to the point where you have to do a little hammer reshaping. Anytime you change alignment, you're kind of committed to having to do a little reshaping, which is why I've gotten so at this aggressive hammer shaping technique. Save your question. There'll be a point here in a minute. And then, of course, you don't want string grooves that are too deep. You know, so I do a lot of this hammer shaping and ironing. And then, of course, mated to the strings, simultaneous contact, you know, gently touching the hammer to the string, very gently, and plucking. And the thing is, if you do this before tuning, you know, the tuning is more pleasurable. And then, you know, you want to make sure the hammer felt's not excessively rigid or too soft. You know, again, have your chalk out. And this is something you can pay attention to while you're tuning. Oh, you know, usually middle C, high C, B flat. There's, you know, the lowest plain wire tenor string. For some reason, they just sound loud and barky. I think they're barking at me, and you can be aggressive on those notes. Mark it with chalk. So you just, as you're tuning, you're spending quite a bit of time listening to every note. That's an opportunity to mark things and fix it. So I really believe you want to build kind of an aggressive approach. And this is that sandpaper I was talking about. 50 grit. I like that it's got the cloth backing. You can just pull off. If you get the width just right, you can pull off a strip, and it's really easy. And you always have a fairly fresh strip to work with. The purple stuff. Yeah, 13 millimeter strips. So, you know, they do last a long time, but I do like to replace them fairly frequently. They're always a little grabby when you first use them. They kind of, after you file a little bit with them, they get a little better. But I'll tell you, this is aggressive material, so go easy. Part of the reason part of it's just starting to deal with repetitive stress issues. I find using a very aggressive paper like this, I can just relax my hand. I don't have to use so much finger pressure, because if you're doing a set of hammers, your hand gets really tired by the end. You know, especially then you're using the coarse grit. This is how I used to do it. Use the coarse grit, followed by the 120 or whatever, followed by the 220, and then the final polishing with the 400. I mean, it takes a long time to do that, and it's just physically difficult. I've really gotten to be a big fan of the, let's see, where is this paddle? Oh yeah, so a wide sanding paddle. This is like a big rectangular one. You'll see the picture coming up here. I originally bought these from Flugelbauer, and I'm sure he's not doing anything anymore. This was it Michael Ross? Anyways, it's another thing you can make your own out of that same plexiglass material. It comes in from the hardware store in like an 8.5 by 11 square, and you can just cut it into fourths, and you can make these paddles. You can see I like how it fits in my hand, as opposed to a skinnier. It's like my hand. It's like a comfortable thing. And I got aggressive paper on one side, probably 50 grit or 60 grit, and then a very polished. So, and then you can use it as a straight edge, because you really want to always be aware of your hammer tops being parallel. Now let's talk a little bit more about alignment. You can barbecue your shanks to align them side to side. And this is a technique, it's kind of one of those things you develop in desperation. I don't ever remember being taught this. This may be a novel technique for you. And the thing is, everybody's familiar with twisting. But you can use a barbecue lighter or a heat source to actually bend it to the side, too. And because sometimes you really need to move it. And the trick is to lean it over, but then they put a little twist so you don't. The idea is not to stress the center pin. It's a little hard to describe exactly. It's a feel thing. But if you can just keep in mind you're trying not to stress the center pin, you're leaning it, and you're kind of doing a counter twist to try to push the butt back the other direction, because you're trying to bend the shank, not the butt. And we're going to and then I always bought lots of these barbecue lighters. I buy them by the dozen because I always want to have one around. I hate not having my barbecue lighter. But then I discovered this thing, this torch on the right, which is very old-fashioned. Gosh, how are we doing on time? 2:42. Got to go fast. Okay, I found it on eBay recently for $38.99. I was under the title Piano Hammer Heating Bottle Copperhead. I'm sure it's coming from China somewhere, but it's really based on an old tool that I've seen. But I've always kind of wanted something like this. And what's cool is you don't have to pull a trigger. Once you get it going, the alcohol, it just is constantly going. So it's very efficient. It stands up on its own. So I can just set it right on the piano, right on the finish, really. It doesn't hurt anything. It doesn't get hot. You just fill it full of alcohol. Alcohol, it doesn't seem to, and I was researching this, alcohol actually has a lower burning temperature than butane. And it feels that way when I'm using it. Almost like it's a little harder to burn, to discolor the shank with the alcohol. But it's a little disconcerting when the shank light's on fire, which happened to me the first time I used it. Because the alcohol, I was running it up and down the shank, the alcohol came off on the shank, and it was like this little blue flaming shank. I was just like, oh my gosh. And then it flashed off and didn't leave any char mark on the shank at all. And it worked really, really well. It's like it got so I'm having a lot of fun playing with this thing. I would recommend trying it. And what's funny is it's just a little quirky. I think depending on how it's sitting in my toolkit, the temperature, sometimes it's like it's really burning hard and I have to tuck the wick in a little bit. Other times it's a little weak, so I'm still getting the hang of it, but I'm really liking it. This is just you demonstrating the barbecue technique here.
This is a demonstration on how to align hammers side to side using the barbecue lighter. Everybody's familiar with doing the angle this way by running the flame up and down, but you can also do it this way by moving it and then giving it a counter twist. So first you want to get the shank nice and hot. So
I usually count
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm going to give it a pretty aggressive twist. I can feel it kind of loosen up. I'm going to hold it while it cools. That moved it over quite a bit. I'm going to straighten it out just a little. Now let's check it with the string.
Yeah, it came
See,
over
that's
quite a
much
bit.
more centered on the string now than it was.
So yeah, I use that all the time. The problem you run into okay, there's a couple problems if you just try to loosen the screw and move it over. Sometimes you tighten the screw and it goes right back to where it was, which is very frustrating. Well, then you could take the flange out and try to put some spacing paper under the bottom of the flange to force it over. But then that takes quite a bit of work, actually. And really, I find this works great. And if you're careful, you won't damage the center pin. And the other thing is if you loosen the screw and move the hammer, you're actually changing the relationship between the jack and the butt just a little bit, because there's a wear pattern. And it may change the lost motion in that note. You know, if it has just the right amount of lost motion, and then you move the hammer over, and you're on a little bit of a thicker part of the butt felt that's not as worn, or the butt leather, I should say, then the jack may not return all of a sudden, and you have to adjust that. So this affects the regulation less, too, just using the heat like that. Okay, any more comments and questions? Hopefully not too much, because still got a little more to get through. Lady over here has a question.
So in your daily job, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good. In the daily job, if we're just practicing on one hammer,
Yeah.
and if it's as grooved as those hammers were,
Mm-hmm.
how are you just practicing on one hammer? It's going to be very different than the rest.
It will be, but what you're doing is you're going to pick out the hammer that sounds the most different than everything around it. And you may need to align it. You're probably going to need to reshape it, and then you'll need to needle it to blend it in. So it'll still sound better when you're done. It won't sound the same as the hammers that aren't grooved, but you know, again, when you're working on these little old uprights, spinets, consoles, it's still going to be, you've taken one note that stood out from the crowd, and now it's blending in more, and maybe even has a little better quality, you know, dynamic range-wise, sustain-wise than the other notes around it. The sustain issue is interesting. I had an experience recently, very talented lady. She works really hard at playing the piano, just an amateur. And she was getting ready to do a house recital, and there's one Bach piece that featured a high C note, and she's just like, it just dies. You know, and I was trying all this fancy stuff. I was tapping the bridge pin in, and you know, pulling up the string on the opposite side of the capo, moving the string in and out of the. I was trying all these little tricks to make the sustain better. Maybe it's better, and then I filed the hammer and just mated it, and all of a sudden, you know, it's just a surprise. And she was sitting in a chair. She was like, and she had counted. She was counting 1, 2, 3, and she was so happy that that worked. You know, and so it was just one of those. You know, voicing work's unpredictable. What I tell people, this is another just language thing, is we're therapists. You know, we can't necessarily guarantee results. What we do is we apply techniques, and every piano is going to respond differently. Some pianos respond beautifully, some are stubborn. Just like if you're a counselor, some people, they just need a little good advice. Other people need years of therapy. So some pianos are like that, you know. They need a total rebuild, you know. But you know, others they just need a little help, you know. So so you try these techniques, but then as you practice them, that experience of fixing that one hammer, you'll go, oh, I see. And the thing is, if you're doing it day after day, and you know, but eventually you are going to want to get into being able to do kind of quick hammer filing jobs. I think is at least I have found that. Okay, we better just kind of keep on going. This is one of my most important voicing tools. This is my favorite vacuum. I've had a couple of them. This is called the Simplicity Sport, but I've also seen it online sold as the Rycar Supra Quick, the super fast vac 500. And for a while on Amazon, they sold the exact same vacuum. It was called Crucial Swirl. It's a lot like the Orec portable in that it has oops, let me back up. I thought the mouse was my laser pointer. Okay, it has an exhaust port back here. You can take the hose, stick it on here, and then especially if you pull the bag out, it's a pretty good blower. Because a lot of times I take actions out. I want to blow things out frequently. So it's just lightweight. It fits in a suitcase. I always carry a suitcase in with my tool bag because it has my extra parts and supplies. It has rags. It has cleaners. It has, I just carry a lot of stuff with me. I work at a lot of schools and some colleges where I'm having to walk 10 minutes to the music room. And it's like, oh, I wish I had that little thing that's in my car. You know, so I tend to carry a lot of stuff with me, including a vacuum. It always comes with me into the house. So they're only like $100. But whatever vacuum you use, because it's such a big part of voicing is the hammer shaping. And if you have a vacuum cleaner, you're more likely to shape the hammers. And everybody knows a clean piano sounds better, just like when you wash your car, it drives better. So just keep in mind your priorities is, really focus on the mid-range. That's where most of the problems are going to be. And then, I don't know why, I shouldn't say focus on the octaves and unisons. That was like a tuning reference. It's more like just focus on those middle octaves and try to get the voicing right there. And then you kind of balance the high treble or low bass if you have time. But the most used notes are where the problems usually are. Middle C, high C. It's funny, those notes always seem to be the worst ones. I find you can be very aggressive in the upper bass and tenor, especially the low tenor. Again, just the design of the piano, the end of that low tenor, especially those last plain wires, they just are naturally very loud. Just when I'm playing, sometimes if it features, let's say you're playing Moonlight Sonata, do-do-do, it's got this. And it seems like there's some piano that had that low note. It was like a Spinetta console or something, and it was the last plain wire was this. It was just like ba-da-da, ba-da-da, and I was having to pull back and play as gently as I. So it does help to play the piano if you want to do some voicing. So if you don't play, learn to play. Even a little bit, will be super helpful. But you got to be careful when you move up into octave 5 and also the low bass. Sometimes you still need some hardness in those areas for them to not become muddy. Sometimes to not get overwhelmed, just think of it as a 5-octave piano. From Mozart's era, pianos were 5 octaves. So it can kind of help you. Pianos, there's just too many notes. It kind of overwhelms you. So kind of focus on that area. That's where most of the action is happening. And the thing about voicing is really that coming back to that one note. If there's just one nasty note, it makes the whole piano sound off. So if you can fix that one thing, the whole piano is going to sound better. Because especially if that note is featured frequently in playing. And clients, they don't know the difference between tuning and voicing. So they may just think, oh, that note's out of tune because it sticks out. And real quick, just talking about stress to your hand. Sometimes I will go back and forth between doing, especially if I'm doing aggressive needling work where it's stressing my hand. Then I'll go back to tuning. I'll go back and forth some because it's just tiring. And the ring needle, that ring tool that Jurgen sells, sometimes I have to support the hammer with one hand, hold the ring tool, and then I use my index finger of the hammer, of the one I'm supporting the hammer with, to help push that needle in. It's like I need a little extra effort. So utilizing both hands can be helpful. This actually I do all the time. When my kids were in diapers, remember we did cloth diapers, and my mom told us this trick, because sometimes the pin just doesn't want to go, the diaper pin doesn't want to go into the cloth diaper. It resists. But if you just brush it through your hair, shoop, goes right in. And the same thing with voicing needles. The same problem is it doesn't work on but one hammer. But I really, if it's needle, I'm always doing that, brushing it through my hair. It works. Try it. And sometimes if I had hammers that are just really grippy, like they just don't want the needle go in, I literally have just put lubricant on the hammers. Protec seems fairly friendly. Again, these are not high-level pianos. I don't know. I don't know if it would hurt to do that on a high-level piano or not, but I tend to be more mass production hammers. Oh yeah, try to relax as much as possible. I think a lot of times when we're holding these tools, it's easy to use more muscle strength than you need. So it's like playing the piano. You avoid injury by accomplishing the task with less effort, trying to put relaxation into it. Yeah, and if you're doing aggressive needling with a 3-needle tool, where you're doing that, try to use the speed. You'll break needles occasionally, but you'll get better at it, instead of just brute force, use the velocity to drive the needles into the felt. And real quick, wow, we're almost to the end here. Just, I found that in the top octave, especially the top half octave even, I've really become a believer in the 2-1 octave as being almost a tonal thing. Sometimes I feel like I can almost tune the last few notes just based on the sound of a string by itself, and if it hits the sympathetic resonance with the octave below, it's like ping, 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 all on its own, just listening to the tone. It happened when I started using TuneLab as an assistant to tune that top octave. I just noticed some pianos, sometimes it's even a little spin-it piano, you'll hear that resonance. And there's a misconception that 2-1 octaves are not stretched very much. But I actually have measured it on pianos. C3, let's say this octave is G6 to G7. So if this, in an organ or an instrument with no inharmonicity, the octave is just doubled in frequency, right? So if the fundamental was 1,580.3, if you doubled that, it's 3,160.6. But if you actually measured the second partial, which would correspond to G7, so you're measuring that second partial, it actually was 3,184. So it's 23.4 hertz sharper than if you were just to double it. That is what is stretch, really. That's what natural stretch. That's the stretch that's built into the piano just by how sharp the partial is off the lower note of the octave. This was just another one going up to the next note. There was even a bigger difference. The inharmonicity is crazy in that part of the piano. The strings are so short, they're very stiff. The partials are going very, very sharp. C7, yeah, you can see as you go up, they get sharper and sharper. This is just 2-1 octaves, pure single octaves. So I consider it kind of a voicing technique. And Don Menino really pointed this out to me in a workshop. It's just, he really listens for that sympathetic ringing. And it seems to happen around the 2-1 point. And I use the ETD for this a lot, where you set the machine to listen at A7 while playing A6 and watch the display. Stop the display and then use that to tune the note that you're trying to tune. So you're basically calibrating the machine to the second partial of the lower note and tuning the octave above to that same pitch. That may seem a little abstract if you're not used to it, but I think if you come back, this class will be available. You can come back and look at that part, and I think you'll get it. But you can hear the swell and clarity and sustain, and some pianos it's quite noticeable. And the more you practice the technique, you'll often start to hear that, and then you'll crave it. I kind of, like the sound of those beautiful little bell-like sounds up there. Okay, it's 2:59, so we're really kind of at the end. I do have some demo videos that we could show if people want to stick around a little bit. Probably the first two are the most important, although The other two are kind of short, just little audio clips. But this shaping, iron, and fitting is kind of good because it is a spin it piano. It's a this is real world work here.
Okay, so I'm gonna align, reshape, iron, and fit these hammers to the strings as quickly as possible. I made some chalk marks early on for hammers that obviously were not lining up properly. So I'm going to use the barbecue lighter to correct these.
This is just to kind of show you how fast.
I find it's actually quicker than trying to use the screw. So many times when you're trying to align hammers to strings, the screw, when you tighten it, the hammer just goes right back to where it was. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I find if I just use the barbecue lighter that it's quicker, it's more efficient, especially on a spin-it piano.
Yeah, spin-it's very hard to get at the screws. Can be. You can do it, but
get at that hammer flange screw. So I just heat up the shank. I'm putting a little bit of side pressure, and then as the heat builds up,
sometimes it's the compound where you're twisting it and spacing it at the same time.
Actually moving it side to side.
As you practice it, you'll get good at it. Oh, a little smoke.
Gotta get a little smoke going.
Ignore the smoke coming from the action.
That's a no-no. I think my flame's a little big here. That's better.
Those cheap barbecue lighters, they vary so much. Some, the flame is just like, others is just weak, you know. Thank you.
Let's go a little more on that one.
Let's just skip ahead a little bit. Okay, now it's just aggressive hammer shaping.
It's going to take too long. You know, hammer shaping is a little bit like tuning, in that if you let it go a long time, it's more of a problem than if you kind of keep on top of it. It's only taking maybe 6 strokes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3.
I do a lot of
5,
counting.
6. So 6 or 7 strokes, and I'm just
these are
coming
down,
up over
from down towards the strike line,
upper
coming
shoulder
down one
here.
side.
I'm
Or
just
skip
right
ahead a
down
little.
the line. Screws and
now I'm coming back,
maintaining somewhat of a rounded shape.
The paddle on the top and the strip on the bottom, because it's a little easier for me to get the strip in.
But
on the
this
lower
work
side.
right here, this is something I do pretty much every day. I mean, I do as much of this these days as I do tuning.
Okay, skipping ahead.
This really gets it done
just
quick.
cleaning them up a little bit.
And then on the home stretch here, center of
backing it out.
It'll make a wet finger sizzle, but it won't burn the felt.
That's the inline dimmer switch.
But even so, I don't want to keep it on the felt very long. I want this to go very quick.
Yeah,
so let's see how long this takes here.
No, I have it plugged in. It's actually plugged into an outlet. But you need a control.
I've just found going with the 50 grit to aggressively remove some material, and then
what is amazing to me is 50 grit sandpaper, and then look at the close-up of
smooth out
these
the hammers.
They almost look like they came out of a box.
Nice smooth shape. Now let's just take a quick look at what this looks like. We'll take a closer shot.
You never know that was such.
You can see how smooth those look with 50 grit sandpaper. That's pretty good. That's fine.
Just checking the fit.
That's okay. Now that one, it needs some improvement. Now on this one, I'm going to show how you can actually push the needle through the crown like that. I'm basically going kind of
so if this is the crown, I'm
kind
of coming in
it's a side
under
stitch,
it like this.
I'm trying to lift up the felt.
Just lift that whole thing up a little bit.
You can see it worked.
And
but
if
sometimes
you go deep, it doesn't seem to
come back
muffle the sound.
I like to burnish the hammer.
If you do it close to the surface, you'll really change the tone a lot.
Just a little bit, yeah. Now it's good.
And it maybe looks like I'm holding that hammer hard against the string.
A lot of times I use the needle to actually lift the felt. I'm
using my thumb just to barely touch it.
It doesn't affect the tone as much as you might think if you go a little deep. If you do it near the surface, it will have more of an effect on the overall tone.
And the plucking doesn't seem, if you're gentle with the plucking, it
just gonna
doesn't
shut
seem
up and do this
to
quick.
ruin the needle. Now, it's almost like some of these old hammers are like, sometimes the hammer almost feels like a little bit like Play-Doh. If you fit, it actually, you can kind of push it around more than you might think. But yeah, it really doesn't come through in the video, but it's you got to really develop a very gentle touch where you're just barely holding that hammer. But that's another thing you can do to adjust the resolution of what you're doing. You know, if you're wanting to not be so picky, just use a little more pressure. If you want to be super picky, just barely touch it. You know, the thing is, if you get it just in the ballpark, it makes the most difference. Let's see if we skip ahead a little bit.
Do that. Like this one, I think that middle string is a little high, but I don't want to have a damping issue, so I'm going to try to do it with the needle.
Yeah, and with uprights in particular, if you start pushing on the strings, sometimes you can
use the side of it. I got sandpaper on one side if I want to be aggressive, but the other side is just the plastic. And if you just use it like that,
that technique I really like a lot of the time. That's what I call the seesaw technique. You're actually using the side of the paddle to kind of rock it with a lot of pressure, because sometimes you have a high spot right in the middle. You can actually press it down. But again, it depends on the hammer. Some hammers, old hammers that have been reshaped, seem to be a little more malleable than like a newer, more resilient hammer.
In the middle, to push down
newer
the
resilient
felt
hammers really respond to if you needle down inside the hammer and cause it to expand up.
Good.
You know.
You can also come in from the side a little bit. Smooth that out a little. That's good. Okay,
that's probably enough of that. And let's just do a little more. This is sort of the second part.
So like I was saying, old hammers,
that's the ring voicer
sometimes
there.
You can treat them just like a lacquered hammer. So oftentimes you can go right into the crown.
Hammers.
Sometimes you have
all the
to get
stuff that people do on
sort of
grands,
effect.
You do it on uprights, and it's even easier because you have such good access to the hammers.
Now on a
carbon paper
hard pressed hammer like a
stick, I just brush a little on the
Yamaha
strings,
hammer,
play the hammers in, and then wipe clean off the graphite. That's the two-finger technique I was talking about.
What I'm doing right here, needling in between the.
Because it's hard to get that big needle into the felt, but you really kind of need.
Can have a surprisingly big effect.
On pianos like this, you need that aggressiveness.
So in those hammers, I would be likely to kind of go in between the imprints, but some consistency.
So this is mostly just showing how aggressive I can be with these. But you can get these just, even if it's just a little spin at a console, you get this kind of beautiful sound.
See, I'm going to use this two-finger technique. I'm kind of using
more
my
of the two-finger technique. Let's see if there's anything more important. I just find something satisfying by taking these
now I'm going to follow that up with a burnishing.
Like reasonable musical instruments.
Let's see if I can balance this up. Pushing the hammer into the string and giving
this is like that settling things in after you do a bunch of needling. I like to come through and just play it, play it in.
I find this kind of simulates some playing, it kind of desperation. Okay, let's listen to it now.
So I find that sometimes
now it's just got
right afterwards,
more articulation. It's a little clearer.
Not muffled exactly, but a little less articulate.
It's amazing for the amount of deep, aggressive, big honkin' needle voicing. It did not kill the tone on this piano.
So yeah, so that was that number 1 or number 2 needle, just aggressively right up at the strike point. You know, you gotta experiment and see what that hammer will respond to. You know, sometimes the shoulder needling will do nothing. and you could be there all day, you know. So you got to work, experiment, and listen. And also, small pianos seem to be and benefit from. They have these very light hammers. They can benefit from a softer hammer, you know. They seem to respond.
All right, let's play a
well.
little real music and see what it sounds like.
So yeah, I take these little pianos seriously. You know, it's what the person has. It's you know, and you can make it. There's something satisfying about working on them, I think. Let's see. These are very quick clips here. This is actually a Wurlitzer spinet I worked on. Here's my virtuosic piano playing. Just kind of a little quick before and after. I don't know about that high E. I'll just call it a false gate, not a tuning problem. And then after, I'm like, you know, I do a lot of before and after recordings for my clients if the piano's really bad. You know, I just get out my phone, I record it before it. Because some of the clients are like, oh, I don't have a good ear. I'm just tuning it because my kid's taking lessons. But if you can play the before and after, go back a couple times, sometimes they just get this, oh, I really can hear the difference. They're surprised. Let's see, after. Sounds like a totally different piano. That's just this basic hammer string fitting, little shaping, some needling. And then, you know, after working on it, then you feel like sitting around just noodling around on the piano a little bit. This is just a little improvisation, you know, and that's what it's all about. It's just inspiring you to want to create. So these little pianos are real pianos. So kind of like you don't expect a ukulele to sound like a $33,000 Big Martin guitar, but there's a lot of fun to be had on a ukulele. So I kind of look at these little pianos. You don't expect them to have a great bass, but they can be a lot better than they are, and there's so much. It gives you tremendous opportunity to practice these skills. So like when I was saying, when you get to the client, where actually this is an important client, you actually will be able to deliver and not just fall on your face. So thanks for sticking with me to the end there, you guys. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks for coming.